So today we have Dr. Ross Piper. Dr. Ross Piper is a zoologist, author, and presenter / on-screen expert. He did his degree in zoology at Bangor University and a PhD in insect ecology at the University of Leeds. He's a visiting research fellow at the University of Leeds and also the University of Essex and the fellow of the Royal Geographical Society. His interest lies in animal diversity, particularly insects, and Ross is a keen science communicator, and in doing so has featured as a presenter and expert for a wide range of programmes. This includes the 3-part series Wild Burma, Nature's Lost Kingdom, which was shown on BBC Two, the CBB series Wild, and the Sky One series Extreme Fears and Extreme Cures. Ross has written a number of books, the latest being Animal Earth, The Amazing Diversity of Living Creatures, which you can buy today in our library after the talk. So today Ross will be exploring the reasons why we still have a long way to go to truly understanding the full extent of animal diversity. Thank you.
Thanks, Leanne. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming along this lunchtime talk. There's Phil over there. Hello, Phil. So yeah, I mean, today I really want to explore why it is we know so little about animal diversity. I've had an opportunity to go to some really interesting places looking for new things. So I really want to give you an overview of why it is we know so little still. So first up, I just want to show you that image. You've probably all seen this image. This is an image of Pluto on the fringes of our solar system. Now, I know I suppose it has a sort of stark beauty, but this is a cold, probably very dead place. Now, you contrast that with that image, a planet of warmth, a planet of life, and a planet of mind-boggling complexity. Yet the sad thing is we know way more about the surfaces of barren rocks in outer space than we do about our own planet. We tend to assume that we've discovered everything there is to know about planet Earth and we've wrung all the mystery out of it, but nothing could be further from the truth. We've barely scratched the surface of understanding life on Earth, from how many species are out there and how they all interact. First up, though, before we get into the reasons for why we still know so little about animal diversity, I want to do a little experiment. Leanne, sorry, can I have the lights back on for a second? I want you to all think of an animal, okay? Picture it in your mind, don't tell me. And if you all stand up for me, if everyone can stand up. So picture one animal in your head, the first things that comes into your mind. So when I ask you to think of an animal, what is it, okay? If you're thinking of a mammal, so any sort of mammal, even if it's one without a fur like a whale or maybe an elephant, then sit down. Okay, if you're thinking of a bird, so obviously something with feathers, sit down. If you're thinking of a reptile, sit down. Amphibian, a fish of any description. Okay, and what have we got left? We've got Mark.
Thinking of a ladybird.
Okay, and here what?
Scorpion.
Scorpion, good. Worm. Okay, good. Okay, good. So all I'm trying to get to the point is that when we think of an animal, we tend to think of all the familiar things. So that's cool. Cheers, thank you. All the things, all the vertebrates. So when we think of an animal, we just tend to think of vertebrates, so either mammal, birds, fish, amphibians, and reptiles. All the other things are really sort of off the radar. We don't really think of them. So these are the main lineage of animals. So most of you thought of a vertebrate of some sort, represented here by the hummingbird in the top right corner. But there's all these other different types of animal, all these other body plans, most of which most people have no idea about. And the most speciose of those are obviously the arthropods, so the insects, crustaceans or arachnids, the mollusks, annelids, nematodes, and the platyhelminths down here. So there's this extraordinary diversity of animals, but to most people they don't even feature, they don't even register in their heads. Just looking at the insects specifically, this is what we know in terms of diversity of the most speciose groups of insects. So from this side with the beetles, around 380,000 known species, through to the flies. These are big numbers, but I think you can probably multiply all of those by at least 10. Probably way more for the total diversity of insects, at least. Then there's all the other things that we know next to nothing about, whether it's nematodes, mites, all these other animals that don't even feature really in the vast majority of research that goes on. So why is it then? Why is it we know so little about animal diversity? Well, I think firstly, which is probably an obvious one, but maybe you haven't thought about, is The Earth is massive. We tend to forget that. Now, it's so easy to go from one continent to another, we tend to forget how big the Earth is. Often when people talk about the size of the Earth, you know, it's in our heads that the ocean is a massive habitat. When you're thinking of the habitats available on land compared to the area of the land compared to the area of the sea, not much difference. But if you look, the whole volume of the ocean is a potential habitat. And we've explored probably much less than 1% of it. When people talk about the exploration of the oceans, it's often 5%, but that 5% refers to the seabed. That whole volume of the ocean is a habitat, and we've explored next to nothing about it. What this figure doesn't really grasp, though, is the fact that all the forest habitats on the land are extremely complex. And if you factor in the volume of those and how many places where different things can live, that's also enormous. And that's one of the main, for me, that's one of the main frontiers, I think, in exploring animal diversity. If you think of the canopy of a rainforest, there's just masses and masses of places where things can eke out some sort of existence. And the other reason, so the Earth is big, and also how we understand the Earth is normally in a two-dimensional space. So we've got this globe, we've squashed it and contorted various bits of it to make it fit into a two-dimensional representation. The most common one here is the Mercator projection. So when you look at a map of the Earth online, it's normally this one. But everything on the middle part here, so everything along the equator has been massively distorted. So in this Mercator projection, Greenland and Africa look almost the same sort of size. But in actual fact, Africa is 15 times bigger than Greenland, a massive landmass. When you think of all the corners and different places where things can live, there's a huge number of places to explore. These are some of the things, these are bigger animals, so I'm not talking about smaller animals, these are bigger animals that have been discovered in the last few years in some of the biodiversity hotspots all around the world. The Olinguito here, which was discovered on the eastern slopes of the Andes, which is a new type of lingo. And we've got Cropan's boa that was rediscovered after 64 years in the Atlantic forest of Brazil. A new type of tree porcupine, also from the Atlantic forest of Brazil. The Zula monkey from Central Africa, the badger bat. And then this type of gecko here that can shed its skin to get away from its predators. You know, these are big animals, but these have all been discovered in fairly recent times. So you think of all the smaller things that are still out there, still to be discovered. A main interest of mine at the moment is so northern Myanmar. So that whole corner of northern Myanmar, up in the top right there, near the national park Kakabarazi, which is a really big mountain, all of that area is effectively unexplored. There's no infrastructure. It's very difficult to get in there, but you can guarantee that if you did, you'd find all sorts of wonderful things. I've been as far north as Tamantha here, but then getting up into here is extremely difficult. You're talking ride on the back of a moped for around 75 miles and then walking 125 miles through forest to get to the mountains if you're interested in sort of alpine beasts. And so far what we discovered from there, from northern Myanmar, a huge rate of endemism. So 25% of the plants are only found in that part of the world. This is what the terrain looks like. So imagine trying to explore that sort of terrain with those extremely steep slopes and the forest like that. You know, it's an incredible place. This is up in the upper reaches, so this is like beyond, so 3,500 metres. And you can guarantee if you were allowed to explore there, you'd find tons of interesting stuff. But no one's really been there. If you want to have a look later, you can have a look at this documentary that was made by National Geographic and one of the clothing companies, I think it was North Face. So a team of American climbers tried to climb this mountain. This is Kakabarazi Mountain. So this is in the middle of that national park. So in the 21st century, you know, 2019, we don't even know how tall that mountain is. No one's climbed it with a calibrated GPS to measure it properly. It's only been climbed once by a Japanese climber in 1996, who'd climbed everywhere, and he said that was the most difficult climb he'd ever done. And there's places like this all over the world that people haven't really been to and haven't really explored. When people are talking about exploration, it's normally about getting from point A to point B or just to climb a mountain. They're rarely there to look for new types of plants and animals. And we mustn't forget that the Earth is still full of mystery. And there's still loads of places to look. And so not only is the Earth massive, most animals are really small. You know, most are much less than 1 centimetre, lots and lots, and much less than 1 millimetre even. This is something I found in my garden here. There's something called a fairy wasp. That is 0.8 millimetres. These are all parasitoids of the eggs of other insects. And that's not even the smallest one. They go down to as small as 0.14 millimetres. Now, this is smaller than a lot of single-celled organisms. But in that tiny space, you've got incredible complexity. Thousands of cells shrunk down to this tiny, tiny space. There's a lot of interest in these at the moment, these fairy wasps, because their brain is so tiny. Their brain, which is maybe made up of maybe 8,000 neurons, their whole brain is smaller than one of your individual brain cells, just like shrunk down into this miniature space. And so there's a lot of interest by DARPA, which is the defence agency in the States, looking at new techniques to make autonomous drones and so forth. Because if they can figure out how the brains of these work, these tiny, tiny brains can do complex things, complex behaviours and all sorts of things that if we can understand how they work, it could inform the new types of artificial intelligence. So there's a huge amount of interest in these at the moment, these tiny little organisms. And take this. These are the animals that live in between and on the sediment grains of the seabed. Now, in one handful of this habitat, whether it's a bit of marine mud or sand, you can find representatives of more animal lineages than you can find in an entire tropical rainforest. And there's almost no one studying these things really compared to, all the research that goes on with vertebrates and so forth. But there's an enormous range of different body plans and different things going on in this habitat, but on a very miniature scale. Most of these things are much less than 1 millimetre long, but they're all complex animals. And then the other point is, so not only is the Earth huge, most animals are small, but we're also drawn to similar animals, as I showed at the start. We tend to form an emotional attachment to animals that are very similar to us. Normally a mammal. So something, with fur, something that's cute, something with doe eyes. But most animals, lots of animals are faceless, and an awful lot don't even have a head. And so to us, they can appear very alien indeed. I mean, it's much easier to identify with a lioness and the challenges she faces nurturing her cubs on the plains of Africa than it is to form any sort of emotional link with a faceless crustacean that spends most of its life attached to the eye of a fish. This is a challenge you face, trying to convince anyone that, oh yeah, these things are important too, but if you look at the biology of these things, they're absolutely fascinating. But they don't register with most people because they're just so odd, so alien. And appearances can also be very deceiving. Simply relying on the way something looks can be really deceiving. And this in part is linked to the popular preconception of how evolution works. To most people, evolution is this simple one-way process where simple forms give rise to progressively more complex forms. And so it's become ingrained that simple forms must be primitive. But in adapting to a particular niche, an animal can lose some, if not all, of the complexities of its ancestors. And so this degeneration, this secondary simplification is extremely common, and you see it all over the place. My favourite example, though, is this one. Now, going on appearances alone, you might assume that this is something that's been coughed up by another animal. But this is actually a crustacean. It's a type of copepod. So on the right here, that's what a copepod normally looks like. This thing, though, Sarcotaces, is a parasite, and in adapting to a parasitic way of life, it's lost nearly all of the complex structures of its ancestors. No limbs, no real sense organs. It's really just become a bag for feeding and reproducing. So as a larvae, this animal penetrates the fish of a skin, the skin of a fish, and stimulates the tissues of the fish to produce a sac-like cyst in which it lives and through which it accesses the fish's blood. But what's really odd is the sexual dimorphism. Now, I don't know if you can see that thing at the top there, but whenever you're feeling really sorry for yourself, spare a thought for that little chap, because that's the male up there. So this big blob is the female, and that's the male. So he spends his whole life squashed up against the inside of this cyst by the enormous blob-like female. Now, how about that for an existence? And so all he is really is just a little sort of like a group of cells producing sperm. That's his lot. So not much of an existence there for the male Sarcotaces. And then appearances again, so what you also see, not only do you see loads of examples of degeneration and secondary simplification, you also see tons of this mimicry, where, can anyone guess what this is? I suppose, because the audience I'm talking to today, I suppose someone will guess what this is. What is it? A moth. Who said moth? Yeah, super. So it's a moth that's pretending to be a wasp. But the subtlety of this mimicry was incredible. This one was from northern Burma. It was probably only about maybe 12 millimetres long, but the mimicry, not only in terms of the appearance, but the way it flew, was so wasp-like, I must have done like a triple take. It's like, oh, wait, it's a moth. Look at it. Incredible mimicry. And you see that again and again. Hundreds of thousands of examples of this absolutely incredible mimicry. This is another one here. This is actually... So can anyone guess what this is? Shout out. A beetle. So it's pretending to be a weevil, but it's actually a plant hopper. So the head of the plant hopper is here. There's the eye. And the back end is mimicking the rostrum. And the antennae, look, of a weevil. And even a false eye spot. Now, what is that about? But exactly what this is doing that for, no one really understands. I mean, this weevil in question it's pretending to be doesn't appear to be full of any toxins, so who knows? And there's mysteries like that all over the natural world. Hundreds and thousands of examples. So cryptic diversity too. So not only do we have appearances can be very deceiving, but then also the outward appearances of an animal also conceal an enormous amount of cryptic diversity. This is where what we assume to be one species is actually a complex of several outwardly identical looking animals. But in terms of how they live, they're all very different. And we can only discover anything about that cryptic diversity if we look at DNA and we understand the ecology of the animals in question. Which is a big ask, but that's what we need to do to uncover this cryptic diversity. This is one example here. This is a parasitoid wasp from Costa Rica. Now, what was assumed to be one species of parasitoid actually turns out to be 36 different species when we look at the DNA and we look at the ecology of the animals in question. So they all look outwardly identical. It's only when you look at their ecology and DNA do you find out there's an enormous amount of extra diversity there hidden from plain sight. So you've got all this diversity that obviously we know very little about, but then it comes down to actually like going out there and discovering it. And collecting and identification can be extremely difficult. This is a new genus I found in Burma again. This is a type of thing called a mantis fly. Now, I know it looks a little bit similar to a praying mantis, but it's a different group of animals that's related to lacewings. Now, this one here, these are unusual because the larvae are typically parasitoids of egg spider sacs. So the larvae of this animal has to go and find an egg spider sac, gets into it, and then it feeds on the spiderlings inside. And so that, that whole life history is obviously very, very difficult to accomplish successfully. And so they're very rare. I think I could go back to the same place where I found this and I could spend a month looking for it and never see it again. I think a lot of these things seem to be able to exist at very low population densities. I think most species are, in actual fact, very rare. But we tend to assume that animals are everywhere, but that's just because we've got a few very common species. These things here, I mean, this is the type of buprestid, so I think called a bullet beetle or a jewel beetle. So an enormous group of beetles, around 20,000 known species. As larvae, they live in dead and decaying timber. And that larval stage can last for years. In suboptimal conditions, the record is about 51 years. But the adult might live for only a few weeks. So unless you're in the right place at exactly the right time when the adults emerge, you'll never know they were there because they tend to be right deep down in the dead or decaying wood. Unless you're tearing apart loads of dead wood, it's difficult to find them. But when they have these emergencies, they normally all emerge as adults at the same time. And unless you're there at the right time, you won't find them. This one was from North Malaysia. This is a moth that I found also in, this was from Myanmar as well. This is probably only the second time it's ever been seen. It was first described from northern India, Sikkim in northern India in about 1894. But this is only the second specimen that's ever been found. So is it just incredibly rare or does it spend all of its time up in the canopy? No one knows. Because, we've been able to just describe a species as one thing, but it's really the thin end of the wedge. Because there's so much more we need to know about. Not only have we described it, we've also got to try and figure out how it lives. And that's a really big question. And answering those questions will take an army of scientists thousands of years, I think. And then this beast here, this is a type of dung beetle. This is just to illustrate the point that some insects have such extreme habitat specialisation that unless you're looking in exactly that right place, you're not going to see them. This one spends most of its time clinging to a monkey's bum. So it's a dung beetle, so it's waiting for the faeces to come out so it has first access to those because dung in these tropical places is such a precious resource. But how many entomologists are training their binoculars on these sorts of tiny microhabitats? Probably not many. Then this one here, again, I tend to come back to the parasitoid wasp because their life histories are absolutely fascinating. This one here, one of the most fascinating ones, and this really sort of illustrates the point that for some of these animals, their life history, their life cycle is such a lottery, it's a surprise that they exist at all. This one, as an adult, this is the adult female. She uses the hole punch-like abdomen to lay her flattened eggs in the margins of leaves in the hope that they'll be eaten by a certain type of caterpillar. And if they are eaten, the eggs are swallowed and the larvae hatch and they tunnel out of the caterpillar's gut into its body cavity. But the caterpillar is not the host. The host of these animals are other parasitoids that have already infected that caterpillar. So for this thing to complete its life cycle, not only must its eggs be inadvertently eaten by the right sort of caterpillar, that caterpillar must already be infected by the right sort of parasitoid, whether it's another type of fly or another type of wasp. And it just underlines the odds are stacked against any one of these things ever reaching adulthood. These things are incredibly rare. I've only ever seen one of these. I saw one in Peru a couple of years back and I accidentally squashed it because I'm a sausage-fingered oaf. So I've only seen one in all that time of looking for things. Incredibly rare beasts. And then there's few people looking, there's not very many people looking at, and beyond vertebrates, there's not many people looking at any of these other groups of animals, really. Take the nematodes, these are hyper-diverse. Probably, some people think these are even more diverse than insects, maybe millions of species, but because they all look so morphologically similar on the outside, it's very difficult to get a grip on just how many species there are. And there's hardly any people working on nematodes, really, their taxonomy and how they live. And look at some of these numbers here. Just in one teaspoon of marine sediment, you can find 1,000 individuals. And in 1 acre of farm soil, up to 9 billion individuals, representing thousands of different species. But again, hardly anyone's working on these things, really. But these things are crucial too because they're involved in every single terrestrial and marine interaction that goes on. And so being able to understand how these fit in life on Earth is crucial, I think. Take these ones. These are some SEMs of different nematodes. Each one of these species lives only in the gut of giant African millipedes. And there's a whole ecosystem in that tiny habitat. These are the ones that feed on the microbiome of the millipede, but then there's other predatory nematodes that feed on these. So in that tiny space, you've got this whole microcosm of life. And how many people are going to be studying these? There's one chap who studies these, a chap called David Hunt, but that's about it. No one else really, out of 7 billion people. And you think of all the diversity out there to explore, it's just a bit mind-boggling. But why does any of this matter? Who cares? This is a question you always get asked, if ever you're talking to people like TV or radio. So why does any of this matter? Who cares? That's the question. And, what is the answer? For me, I think it's important to remember that, every living thing is a component of the natural systems that keep us alive. And we can only understand those natural systems when we know the component parts. But more than that, I think evolution is the greatest problem solver. And by studying life on Earth, I think we'll find solutions to many of the problems that are facing humanity. So by studying organisms and the way they live, people have come up with some amazing discoveries. So from a certain type of jellyfish, people discovered a thing called a green fluorescent protein that has completely transformed our understanding of cellular and developmental biology. But it was just by someone's curiosity they found out that these things fluoresce under UV. This one here, this is a type of snail, a predatory snail, a conus snail. Now, by studying the toxins, the venom of these animals, these are acutely venomous, these mollusks. People have discovered a new type of compound for treating severe chronic pain that's around 1,000 times more effective than morphine. But it's only by some curious scientist who was looking at the venom of this beast. And this one here, this is a tardigrade, much less than 1 millimetre long. But these normally live in water films, so really thin, whether it's around lichen or different types of debris. So these are tiny little animals, but because their habitat can dry out periodically, they need to be able to go into a state of suspended animation so that effectively time travelers from one period of favourable conditions to the next. And when they enter that state, a state called cryptobiosis, they can replace all of the sugars in their body with all the water in their body with a simple sugar called trihalose. And that crystallization process has been studied by people interested in trying to develop new types of energy-efficient LED lights because of the crystallization process that happens in these animals. And so there's all sorts of weird and wonderful applications, you know, if we're just willing to look and be curious about all the different things we share the planet with. And as one final point, I mean, I think as it is more intrinsic, the intrinsic value of what's around us, but I think as intelligent beings, I think it's really our duty to protect and to understand our fellow organisms, not only for their own right, but also because of what they teach us about the phenomenon of life. And I think, you know, because we live in at the end of the day, we live in a cold universe, but we're the privileged inhabitants of this beautiful living planet, and so I think it's that we need to cherish above all else. So thank you. Thanks for listening. Was that, yeah, bang on. Okay.